Well, folks, it's time to sit up again for another episode of the Soul Sessions. I'm your host, Soul, and with me today, he is maybe a nasty bastard or the king of freaks. But wait, Alton Thorne, welcome, my friend, to the Soul Sessions.
Evening, how we doing?
Very well, my friend. But Alton, as I love to say with every guest, it's the old saying, every guest has a story and every story has a beginning. I want to know, Alton, how did your story begin as a wrestling fan?
It began with my nan.
Oh.
My nan was a massive World of Sport fan. I think a lot of people during the 60s, 70s, 80s in England were all very, very big fans of World of Sport. It got huge numbers. But obviously, around the time I was born in '86, and around that time was when British wrestling was starting to kind of peter out in this country. So Nana didn't really have wrestling on TV. So what she used to do is go to car boot sales and pick up VHS copies of WWE events and stuff. So as I was growing up, she had a massive video cupboard filled with lots of like WrestleManias, and I'd pull them out and look at the cover, and I'd be like, there's lightning bolts and Hogan looking at Andre, and I'd be like, what is this? So it started really with that, with me kind of checking out the video covers and going, I've got to see what's on this, and then putting it in and being exposed to this crazy, ridiculous world of wrestling, 80s, early 90s wrestling. So yeah, it started with my nan. She started the whole obsession. It grew from there.
Right, very wholesome, my friend, indeed. But obviously, you mentioned those cassette tapes having like the covers on them, and usually they'd be the posters to advertise the events, and they were always so striking. I think of like the Rumble one with Austin and the pinheads in his head and everything, and the WrestleMania 17 and 18s. I want to know, Alton, which like covers of VHS tapes or the posters come to mind as like striking? Like you see that in a Blockbuster or something, you're like, all right, I got to take that home. I got to rent that right now.
The one that really hooked me in was WrestleMania 4. And the reason for it was not necessarily the case, although it did have Hogan and Andre kind of like staring at each other aggressively on the front. It was a double VHS. So it was like it was two VHSs put together, and as a kid, I was like, "This is how long is this event? Like, what's So that was the one that I remember being the first one where I was really like, I've got to watch this. And WrestleMania 4 isn't a particularly brilliant show. There's lots of like kind of throwaway-ish matches and a tournament that's quite slow, but I loved it as a kid. Absolutely loved it. It was Macho Man coming down to the ring in 4 different costumes throughout the show with Elizabeth, and just it seemed too huge to be like real life, and that's kind of my takeaway from it, was that I didn't, it seemed like a whole other world. It definitely didn't seem like anything I would ever be able to be involved in any way, shape, or form. It just seemed like this planet that was miles away from like my world and my nan's world. And my nan, unfortunately, passed away like a month and a half before I debuted, so she never actually got to see me wrestle. But her, for the wholesome stuff that you were talking about, her maiden name was Alton. So the reason my name is Alton Thorne is so that every time I'm at a show where my name gets said, my nan kind of did end up being there, if that makes sense. So yeah, that's my wrestling origin story for you.
Well, Alton, that is very, very wholesome, my friend. Getting to have that part of the legacy that got you into this there at the ring. That's a story, my friend, and that's touching as well. Also, I do want to touch upon as well, the whole tape trading. You mentioned like kind of the British wrestling scene dipped and then the tapes came in. Obviously WCW and WWF at the time weren't aired live here in the UK. You have to catch them at a later date. Do you think that tape trading aspect of wrestling helped resurge in the UK wrestling scene, and that's why it is now today because of those tapes back in the day?
Yeah, I think it did have a big impact. I mean, especially if you look at the current deathmatch scene, all of those guys, really, all of us were tape traders to a certain extent. So a lot of like the really hardcore fans used that to kind of tide them over when there was nothing else going on. So it didn't necessarily like lead to a resurgence, but what it did was kept wrestling alive in this country for the people that really wanted to see it. Now you don't have that issue at all because you can stream it on a million different services. But at the time, like without like doing what my nan did and buying VHSs, you wouldn't have been able to get most of the content that me and Big Joe and Darko and all these guys that were massively into it loved at the time, you know?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely as well. And obviously, people like to say about ECW and all that back in the day, but I believe like in Japan, it was Onita's FMW, if I'm correct, was just as important as well. Do you feel like FMW is not really given that much acknowledgement for what it's done, especially for the deathmatch and extreme scene?
I think I think history is massively important in the deathmatch scene.
Mm-hmm.
Like we take great stock in the people that did things first, and that's why guys like Iceman and Clint Margera are still seen as like huge names for the deathmatch fans, because we respect that they were around doing it before other people were. And with Anita's stuff, like he was, for a lot of people, he was where they saw Foley Funk, or they saw barbed wire matches with the whole ring surrounded in barbed wire. So I think the importance of that is that for a lot of people, it was that first bit of exposure. It was that first um, uh, step into a more extreme world. I think also you have to give credit to magazines like Power Slam for that as well, because without Power Slam, I wouldn't have known about FMW. I wouldn't have known about Japanese Death Match, and I was in that kind of. I was informed of that at the age of like 13. So that's a crazy world to find out about when you're so young and impressionable. Yeah. I think it is underrated how important that period, that late 90s period, mid to late 90s period was for deathmatch. But I think the people that love deathmatch know, because the history is so important to us. So yeah, that'd been my take on that.
Oh, fair, yeah, absolutely. As well, before I move on, I want to touch about that Power Slam, because that's not something I'm familiar with. What was Power Slam? Was it like a magazine in the late 90s, especially about the deathmatch scene, or was it a sports magazine?
No, it was a monthly wrestling magazine in England. I don't know if it was in Scotland actually, or the rest of the UK, but it was definitely in England. But it was relatively hard to find. Like I'd say it was in like one of 10 paper shops, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
But what it did, it didn't just have death; it had everything. So I found out about Ring of Honor through that magazine. It
Oh.
basically was like our closest equivalent to something like Pro Wrestling Illustrated, which kind of tries to cover everything.
Mm-hmm.
But it was a little bit more insider than Pro Wrestling Illustrated, which still kind of tends to keep their stories a little bit kayfabe, or at least touch around kayfabe.
Mm-hmm.
Power Slam was very much like a little bit more insider, a little bit more what's going on here, what's going on there. And I think it was just fascinating for guys like myself who wanted to feel bit like explore the industry on a larger scale than just the 2 or 3 giant shows. It was a
Mm-hmm.
massive eye opener for guys like me who wanted to go further and find more.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, and it's always great to see learning, because I love to learn. If I can learn from guests or reading documentaries or everything, I love learning. But one thing I want to educate you, Alton, of how I actually came to know about the deathmatch scene as well was because of one individual leaving WWE and turning up against Nick Gage, Mr. Matt Cardona, the deathmatch king, hitting
Yes.
hitting Nick Gage with the light tube, and then basically re-emerging himself as the deathmatch king. I want to know for yourself, Alton, what do you think Matt Cardona's done for deathmatch wrestling?
Well, I think Matt Cardona was riding a wave that was already getting bigger by that point. So I think over the course of COVID, because ICW No Holds Barred and GCW were pretty much the only shows still running, there was, I think people rediscovered deathmatch, or quite a few wrestling fans during that period.
Mm-hmm.
So I think as we came out of COVID, it was starting to become hot again anyway. And I think Matt Cardona is an incredibly clever and versatile wrestler. And I think he spotted that he could do something pretty special, especially with like the reputation that Nick Gage has. You know, a lot of people in the modern day, if they think of deathmatch, they kind of think of Nick Gage. I think like he's one of the first people that you'd think of. So I think what Matt Cardona did was capitalized on a moment and made the wave even bigger. Because then not only is he grabbing the chances that are coming with the influx of new deathmatch, but also he's bringing the more casual fans in who might not have checked it out because it's brutal and deathmatchy, but then go, but I actually really like Matt Cardona. He's a great heel. He's this, he's that. And then it pulls more eyes into it. So I don't necessarily think he was the reason like there's been a giant deathmatch boom again, but I think he was on the crest of that wave and he definitely helped things along. Oh, and that match was my favorite match of that year, I think. I think that's the way to tell a wrestling story with violence. I absolutely loved it.
Mate, I remember watching that match, him and Nick Gage for the championship, like staying up until like 4 fucking a.m. and just like, I just want to see what happens. And then when he won and the fucking trash coming in, it's like the first time I've ever actually kind of seen that kind of reaction from someone. I was like, oh shit.
Genuine heat, right? Like legitimate heat, like real animosity. That's passion. That's when you've grabbed the fans by the balls, when you can get that kind of reaction out of them.
It's definitely a hell of a reaction. And also then GCW would, ride on that wave as well. And they would have like the World on GCW at the Hammerstein as well. And I was excited for the show. I had it actually booked and pre-ordered on Fight, ready to watch it. And I feel like I'll like with myself and a lot of other individuals, maybe we're a bit let down. It seemed a bit rushed, seemed a bit long and all that. Why do you think GCW tripped over this kind of hurdle with the World on GCW? Or do you think it was actually a bit of a success?
It's a really good question, actually. So I do think they tripped slightly because I don't think the show was what people hoped it would be, because they had a chance to showcase what they're all about on every kind of level. Show these new fans that were coming in to see the big event what they were capable of, and I'm not sure whether it was the card itself, whether it was it didn't feel like the GCW that had built up to that moment. But that happens quite often when smaller companies have a chance at the big time. When you get that big stage, you want to try and please everybody, and then maybe you move away from pleasing your core audience slightly, and then you move away. You don't quite hit the audience you're looking for because you're still trying to please the core audience too much, and it all kind of gets lost in the center somewhere. That's probably what happened. But in the long run, I don't think it's been an issue for them because they're running, 2-3 shows a week. People are paying for them. They've got a monthly deal with, is it Fight now as well? So exactly. So I don't think in the long run it did them any damage. I just think it was maybe a bit of a false start.
Aye, very true as well. And they were doing stuff in Japan as well, Germany. They're going worldwide, and they've came over as well to the UK to do stuff. So maybe a little bit of triple hurdle, but they're definitely going for the sprint because GCW, they're thriving. I mean, hey, they got Blake Christian as their world champion now. I mean, hell of an individual in himself. With the GCW World Championship, it's actually kind of an intergender title because I know women have held it in the past. Do you think that's a special aspect of kind of like with these Deathmatch Extreme thing? Because anyone can really hold the title.
I think that's more and more of a thing in deathmatch generally. I think is that it's kind of seen as more and more that anybody can do it. And again, that is a GCW led enterprise. I think with like Masha Slamovich or Sawyer Wreck. ICW have been great for leading the charge on that as well. But I do think that perhaps deathmatch wrestling kind of took the forefront in leading the way for it's not even really described as intergender anymore, really, is it? It's just you just have matches, and sometimes the person is male and sometimes the person's female, and it is what it is. I think deathmatch is, from my personal experience, one of the most accepting scenes and groups of people that I've ever come across. So, so from my perspective, I would have absolutely no issues wrestling a woman. In fact, my tag team partner Harley Harris, who regularly has matches with just men, and we don't go, right, how do we plan this spot to make sure that it's fine for a woman? We just we treat it as we would any other match. But no, I think Deathmatch has kind of led the charge in that. And Charlie Evans is a great example of somebody who's open and a fantastic deathmatch wrestler, but she's very open and out about saying we don't need this divide in wrestling anymore. Like, if you can't figure out how to tell a story with somebody of the opposite gender, then maybe you're just not inventive enough.
Hey, fair play indeed, my friend. And obviously, those GCW crowds, they're quite something as well. I had Jana Kai, who's the kick demon, who does a lot of stuff for GCW on the show, and she talked about that crowd environment is unlike anything. It ain't like the Swifties with Taylor Swift. It ain't like the Maroon 5 or any kind of that bullshit. It's another level. So I want to know, Alton, why do you think specifically with these kind of deathmatch extreme crowds, they're on a whole other level?
I think they recognise the sacrifice that the wrestlers are making for them. So I think that's the first thing, is that they know that when we have these kind of matches, we're putting ourselves under even higher risk than we would be in a standard match. Now, just wrestling in general is very dangerous. Hundreds of people have died much earlier than they should have doing wrestling. Multiple people have died in the ring doing standard matches. So to then start bringing in other implements and using those, taking even higher risks, I think part of the reason the crowd are so on fire is because they see the sacrifice and they respect it, and they know that we're giving for them, But I also think it's partly a cultural thing. I think deathmatch is kind of a niche of a niche of a niche, because you have wrestling, which is kind of a niche thing, and then you have indie wrestling, which is the niche of the niche, and then you go one step further and you get to deathmatch. So it's quite a small, intimate community. So a lot of the people that come to the shows see each other at every show, or it's like a bit of a reunion. So again, that helps, because then you've got people that are happy to see each other, having a few beers, and they're automatically excited for the matches. So I think it's a little bit of everything, really. Plus, deathmatch is so exciting. There's colours and there's things flying around and there's these giant moments. It's like a Michael Bay film. You've got an explosion here and then something flying off there. And if that doesn't get you excited, then I don't know what to tell you,
Hey, Alton, it's better than a Michael Bay film, because at least that doesn't insult your intelligence. So you're actually having a good time. Hey,
there you go. Yeah. I agree.
I think with the deathmatch, you mentioned it was kind of a niche thing. It was actually kind of brought to the forefront, with Dark Side of the Ring doing Nick Gage and FMW. But AEW as well, they had Nick Gage on live TV on a Dynamite with Chris Jericho just saying, fuck it, deathmatch. I mean, that's going to be like, I can imagine as like a deathmatch kind of wrestler, seeing that on a big promotion TV must have been like, holy shit, he's doing what I do on the big screen.
I think it blew all of our minds. I don't think any of the deathmatch wrestlers I knew thought that we'd ever see light tubes being televised and stuff like that. But I mean, you were at All In, right? John Moxley used skewers in front of 75,000 people. It's definitely reached another level. You're right. I think it's almost become slightly more acceptable to people. I think there's a lot less of the hate that deathmatch used to get. I think people see it slightly differently now. Hopefully it keeps. It was amazing to see it on national TV, and hopefully we can keep growing it into something, something substantial.
Right, absolutely. As long as there's no Domino's or Papa John or Pizza Hut ads, they can get pissy off when Nick Gage pulls out the pizza cup. Let's avoid the term.
I liked that. I'll be honest, I think if you're a deathmatch wrestler and you don't like a little bit of irony and a little bit of kind of slapstick humor, then I found it at least relatively amusing, if nothing else.
creative if anything, my friend. But also,
Exactly.
deathmatch is kind of an offshoot of like the extreme type, like a no holds bar or anything. And WWE, they kind of do their no holds bar matches. But what I'm personally annoyed at, and I wonder if you feel the same, my friend, is when they make like a match stipulation and try to be like, oh, it's a tribal combat, it's a big massive thing, but then it's just a no hold bars match with no extra add-ons onto that. Do you think WWE are a bit, obviously, with being a family kind of oriented company, are a bit hesitant to push out of that no holds bar kind of area of matches?
I think part of the issue is that when they were doing the more hardcore stuff, that's the period during which there were lots of early deaths.
Mm-hmm.
There was lots of people with like coming out of wrestling with brain injuries, or I think I think they tried to do the more extreme side of things for a while, but when you're that large of a company, when you the stocks are so high, and when you've got all of this kind of responsibility, I think it does become harder to kind of put those kind of matches on and then explain them to sponsors or to whoever
Mm-hmm.
it is, because Mick Foley got hit in the head 14 times by The Rock in one match with a steel chair, and then by the end of his career, he was driving past his house for just forgetting that he lived there for a second, having to turn around and go back and stuff. Um, there's massive amounts of danger and risk in what we do, and I don't think WWE want that kind of smoke, and I don't necessarily blame them for that. And I
Mm-hmm.
think there are other places to find it if you do want to find it. So I wouldn't personally hold it against WWE. I think they're supplying something else.
Hey, fair dues. With wrestling, it's like I like to say a pick and mix. You can pick and choose your different things and have a good, fun time afterwards with what you pick.
Exactly. But
But hey, cool.
I will say this though on the point that you were making. I think if you're going to have a stipulation, I think it has to be something new and interesting. It can't just be a rehashed version of something that you've already done. And I think moving on to the Bleeding Gums show for a second, I think
Mm.
one of the most interesting things that Andy's done is all of the matches have a different stipulation, and you're not really sure what they are until you get there, which is something that used to be really like it was a frequent event in deathmatch that you would just have these crazy named matches, and it doesn't really happen that much anymore.
Mm.
So if you do need your fill of matches that do what they say on the tin, then you might want to get yourself down to Bleeding Gums.
Hey, fair dues. You've heard it from Olsen himself. But obviously, let's talk about Bleeding Gums. Obviously, I had Andy on and talking about the show and everything. And he talked about, one thing I want to know your thoughts on, Alton, was how difficult it is to buy light tubes now a day and age. Like he was saying, like it was such a struggle to get these things. And I see them all the time in like death matches. As a deathmatch wrestler, what does it mean to you to feel like a part of your whole identity is now becoming scarce?
It's an interesting one. I don't necessarily mind it too much. Like,
Hmm.
I, so I'm not a guy who. There are some deathmatch wrestlers who love using light tubes, and there are some that don't like using them at all. And I'm kind of in the middle. I'm happy to use them because when you hit somebody with them, the explosion and the white that flies off, and it looks fantastic, and visually it's great. But once it's all layered on the ground and you rub your hand through it, then you end up with loads of cuts down your arm, and you can't hold a pen for 2 weeks. So um, I think light tubes have a place in deathmatch wrestling, obviously, and they're kind of like the main gimmick of deathmatch wrestling, I would say. But I don't think they're needed all the time. I
Hmm.
think sometimes less is more. I think um, when I watch wrestling shows these days, especially deathmatch shows, and there's lots and lots of light tubes, it all kind of blurs into one congealed mess of a show. You can be enjoying it, but if you try and pick out spots, you kind of go, there's just a lot of glass. So maybe having less of it at our disposal will have people being more creative in how they use them in the long run, and also how they use other weapons as well, because something will have to compensate for the things we don't have. So yeah, I can see why people would be worried, but I think every cloud has a silver lining, and it might have some, for the negative side of it, and for what we lose, there might be some positives as well.
Right, very true. Sometimes in the darkness you'll find the light, and you never know what that could be, my friend. But obviously, with Bleeding Gums as well, starting up in Scotland, it's historic. It's the first Scottish-centric deathmatch promotion. Obviously, in Scotland we've had ICW, but they've kind of drifted away from their insanity or insane kind of roots, and they're more just a general wrestling company, not focusing on that kind of stuff. For you, Alton, what does it mean to see the deathmatch scene in Scotland now having a pinpoint starting point with Bleeding Gums?
I think it's huge. I think it's absolutely massive. I think the scene in the UK has been growing over the past couple of years at a really exciting rate. And I think there's room for it in Scotland, in Ireland, in Wales. I think there are markets that are untapped at the moment. And what Andy's doing is bringing a style of wrestling that your country's not seen in this way before. And he's bringing it in style. Like, he's booked all the, like, anybody who's kind of like a deathmatch wrestler on the scene who's making waves at the moment is on this show. So he's not only is he like starting something in Scotland, he's starting it the right way. He's starting it huge. And I think it's incredibly exciting, because what I want to see is the scene continue to expand and grow. I would love there to be more places for guys to work. When there's 12 people doing death matches and there's 3 deathmatch shows, not everybody's got a budget, and some people are going to miss out. The more top quality wrestling shows like Andy's that are around, the better the scene will be, I think. So for me, I think it's very exciting for us as wrestlers, and super exciting for Scottish deathmatch fans. It must be like a dream come true to not have to drive all the way down to Liverpool to watch deathmatch wrestling, you know?
Hey, Alton, no 8-hour train ride for wrestling is fine by me, my friend. I like to have money in my account. My feet aren't sore. My arse isn't numb from sitting on a fabric chair for 8 hours. That's the ideal day for me, my friend. But obviously, you're having a match at the show, which is the ultra-violent referendum. You versus Jack Harrop. And the grass is always bloodier on the other side match. I hear that and I'm thinking, what the fuck do I get from that?
Well, I can kind of clue you in a little bit. So when I was first starting out, when I was first asked whether I wanted to be part of a deathmatch show, the answer was immediately yes. But what I wanted was something that would make me stand out. I didn't want to just be, another name on the list. I wanted something that people would remember me for. And I wanted a weapon that people hadn't seen before. And then I remembered when I was younger, I had a photo album, like one of the old ones where you got the sheets of plastic that go over the photos. That's how long ago we're talking. And there's a picture of it of my dad doing his kickboxing black belt, and he's wrapped in nettles and thorns. And it's like an endurance thing, the theory is pains in the mind. You focus on your carters, you focus on getting the job done, and you don't even think about the things that are wrapped around your neck, right? And that really stuck with me because it's a strong image, like green, like it's the colors thing again. I often refer to colors, but I think they're really important in deathmatch because you get such a wide variety of like white and red, and then when I added nettles to the mix, then you've got a sharp green color as well. I thought nobody's using nettles. Nobody's even thought to use nettles. And everybody knows how much they hurt because we've all been stung, right? So if I take a handful of nettles out of my pocket and rub them in somebody's face, then there's nobody in the audience that people don't know how it feels, but they've got a good idea because they've been stung on the shin or, So I thought that could be my thing. Nettles could be my thing. It could be like a homage to my dad and also a really nasty, vile weapon that's not really been seen before. Jack Harrop is a gardener.
Oh shit!
As his trade as a gardener. So basically, the match is just going to be the two most garden-related deathmatch wrestlers in the world using lots of garden implements to destroy each other. There will be nettles and thorns. There will be cactuses. There will be plant pots. I won't tell you everything that will be involved, but it's going to be pretty brutal.
Alton, brother, all I'm saying is I hope the medics have a shit ton of dock leaves on standby, mate.
I'm used to it by this point. I've used them in 15 matches by this point. I'm fine. Jack's never been around. I mean, he works with them, but he's certainly never been power bombed into them. So we'll see how he does.
Oh god, it's going to be an absolute massive event and historic as well. And obviously, viewers, you can check out the previous Bleeding Gums Wrestling episode, and obviously as well, get tickets for the show at Summer Hall as well. You're in Edinburgh, you'll have an absolute banging time. But obviously, as well, Alton, going on, when I think of the kind of extreme deathmatch scene here in the UK, one promotion comes to mind as well, and that's TNT down south as well. They're putting on absolutely amazing stuff as well, and I know you've done some stuff there as well against Clint Margera as well. But I want to talk about, before that, I'm going to talk about the match, is the place that it takes in, Hangar 34. It looks like a very unique arena as well. What's it like working in Hangar 34?
Liverpool's my favourite city since I was a kid, because I was a big Steven Gerrard fan, a big Beatles fan. So for me, it was always a dream to wrestle in Liverpool anyway. It was one of the cities that I needed to tick off my bucket list. So already I was excited to wrestle in Liverpool. Then you add Hangar 34 to that, which is just it's just such a cool venue for that kind of wrestling. It's kind of large but got a slightly gritty feel. There's a balcony, so you've got people watching you from around the top. I think when we did the DOA 4 show, it was absolutely crammed. There was tons of people in that room, and the atmosphere was absolutely electric. It's nice to have like deathmatch in the UK on that kind of scale.
Mm-hmm.
Because like the other companies like Rise and Kumite kind of deliver a grittier product, whereas TNT is kind of it's got the Progress backing, so it's got a little bit more flash and a little bit more sizzle than the slightly more underground shows. And it feels when you do those shows, they feel important. They feel like you've done something that's substantial.
No, absolutely as well. And I see the commitment from the fans as well, and the passion and energy. And I know you've done other stuff for TNT and like the Thrill Kill Deathmatch tournament as well against Michael Caden. I want to know like deathmatch tournaments as well. You having that one-time match, that's already enough punishment on the body, but like a tournament on and on and on. I can't imagine the amount of prep and mindset you got to have for that.
Well, I've done 2 deathmatch tournaments so far, and I went out in the first round in both. But I didn't, so I got lucky in a way, because I do think that doing 3 death matches in one night is probably the hardest thing to do in wrestling. Like going backstage after the second one and sitting down, I can't imagine how people drag themselves back up. I don't want to beat around the bush. Deathmatch is an incredibly painful thing to do. Like, there's no getting around it. This shit really fucking hurts. So, three of them in a night. It does take a mentality. It does take a special kind of person. But given a chance, I would absolutely do it.
Love to see it, my friend. And now I must also say as well, because a previous guest of the show is the TNT World Champion. Tate Mayfair's beat Shaman A to become the champion. I want to know, Alton, you got to have that drive to get that belt off Tate Mayfair's, right?
No, not at all. I'm more interested at the moment in the Extreme title for TNT. I want to make my name in the Extreme circuit. Now, I've won I've won heavyweight titles for good companies, but I've never won an extreme title yet. So that's the next on my hit list. I want to prove that I'm one of the best extreme wrestlers in the country.
Well, I think that's a desired goal. And as soon as you do win that, I kind of want to have you back on the show immediately, my friend. I might say I do love a bit of an exclusive. So, I'll slip you a 20 quid, maybe a 50.
I'll take it. I'll take it.
Well, it'll be Scottish notes, mate, so it'll be useless for you down south. So I'm sorry there. But obviously, with death matches, sometimes they have a little stipulation where fans can bring their own stuff to the ring for the wrestlers to use. And I've had Mickey Knuckles from the States, and she said the most unique item she had was a used phallic device. So I want to know for yourself, Alton, what's the weirdest thing like a fan's maybe brought to you to use in a match?
Oh yeah, I've seen some weird stuff. But I think actually my favorite one wasn't that weird. It was just something I'd never seen before, and I thought it was really cool. Somebody had brought a boxing glove, and they'd put double-sided sticky tape all the way around it, and then stuck Lego all the way around the boxing glove, right? And it looked like a boxing glove made of Lego because they'd packed so much around it. And I just thought that is one of the coolest little weapons that I've ever seen. So grabbed that and used that straight away. But I've seen all kinds of stuff. I've seen dildos with massive nails shoved through them is not unusual for fans to bring. A giant teddy bear wrapped in light tubes with a giant light tube dick was a good one. Fans think of some ridiculous. I think Andy told you about his face hugger with the pins glued to it. There's another incredibly strange object.
Oh, for fuck's sake. Oh, I love this shit.
I think that there's a direct correlation between deathmatch and people that like comedy horror or like Home Alone or those really kind of like violent slapstick things. I think there is something quite funny about deathmatch and how ludicrous it is. So things like that, I think it's all part and parcel of the experience.
Very, very true indeed, my friend. And obviously, fans are important as well. I know WWE recently released their Superfan documentary on Vlad. It was such a great watch as well. I want to know from yourself, Alton, is there a memorable moment in your deathmatch career from a fan? Just either something they said or something they did, that just made you think, yeah, super fan.
Oh, well, to be fair, fans are the reason that I've been booked as much as I have recently. The fans, I worked for Kumite primarily. That was where I was given my first chance at a death match. But I wanted to work for Rise because that's where all of the big names started. They were doing death matches in this country before anybody else was. So for me, that was a huge goal. But I don't think the booker he's got his guys already. I'm not particularly local. So I don't think I was necessarily in his plans. And then the fans kept messaging him and saying, you need to get Alton Thorne on your show because he's really, really good. And then I got an email in my inbox saying, we're going to have to bring you in because all the fans keep wanting to see you. So the fans have, for me, they've made my career. They're putting me in places where I'll get these opportunities to show what I can do in a deathmatch scenario. So I haven't got like one specific story about super fans, although I've been given gifts and all kinds of lovely stuff from fans. But overall, the reason that I'm doing as well as I am at the moment, the reason that I'm getting around is because the fans were asking for me. So I've got nothing but brilliant things to say about UK Deathmatch fans. I'm very, very positive about them.
That's great. I think that just says something to your talent. You have a connection. And I think wrestling needs that, the connection with the fans, making them care, making them want to see and pay the ticket to see you either win or continue the chase to get the gold. Now, obviously, Alton as well, back in the day, this was before, well, I would have actually been around back then, actually. The WWF had their hardcore title and WCW, I like to call it more of an attempt than a division, their hardcore attempt. And I want to know, now in our day and age, you think maybe companies can have like that kind of hardcore division now?
Yeah, 100%. A company that I work for in Manchester called Sov Pro have got, and they run they get big crowds in. They've run O2 Academy venues, and they've got a hardcore scene, and it's often their hardcore segments are often like one of the most popular parts of the show. I think because of the rise of deathmatch and the rise of extreme wrestling again around the circuit, I think it's becoming more prevalent in other companies as well. North, for example, is another company that have started using more hardcore matches. Maybe it started with ICW, that might be fair to say, because that they I know that they've kind of stepped away from it slightly, but they showed that there is a market for that kind of wrestling in the UK again. And I think it's grown from there, really. So yeah, I think there's more of a place for it than there's been in a long time. And I think hardcore matches are a great way to break up a show. If you've got 7 or 8 matches on your show and you need something a little bit different, why not have something where all hell breaks loose? Why not have something that's a little bit less serious or a little bit more shocking? Why not? I think there's a huge place for it.
Right, absolutely. It's great to see as well. Obviously, moving away from the whole deathmatch scene in the UK too, just the UK in general, we're thriving right now. Impacted their UK tour and 2 gut checks as well. WWE had Clash of the Castle, Money in the Bank, and now talks of WrestleMania as well. Big thing for us. I want it in Scotland. I don't want to travel 8 hours down south, please. Thank you very fucking much. And obviously, AEW with All In, which you mentioned before, coming back as well. I want to know, Alton, as not only just a UK deathmatch wrestler, but a UK wrestler, I can't imagine the sense of pride you have knowing that these big companies are coming over to our little pond.
Oh, I love it. I love it. I saw Leon Slater and Harley Hudson get signed for Impact over the past few days. 2 of our best wrestlers. I love it. I think that the UK at the moment is a hotbed for professional wrestling. I think we're hotter than pretty much anywhere else in the world right now. I think there is a huge market for it, and you can see that in the way that, like you say, all of these big companies are coming over and doing sellout shows, and it's not detracting from what the smaller shows over here are doing. They're still pulling in numbers. I wrestle every single weekend, usually twice a weekend, and the vast majority of the shows I do at the moment are full or very close to full. And I've not seen it like this since I started wrestling nearly a decade ago. So yeah, it's on fire at the moment, and part of the reason that I'm doing your podcast and part of the reason that Andy's opening Bleeding Gums Wrestling is keep that ball rolling, while we've got the fire lit. Just keep it going, right?
Yeah, got to see it rolling, my friend. Now, I want to go to this little segment of the Soul Sessions we like to call the dream scenario. I wish I could have a klaxon or a bell. You know what? Next season, I need to invest in that. I'm going to write that down and actually get a budget for this fucking show. But now going on to like the dream scenario sort of thing. With All In, we mentioned like the Stadium Stampede had like the skewer match and everything, like a bit of a hardcore element. But let's say next All In, next year, we get an actual death match. And let's say it's UK focused. You get to see 2 UK talent focused in a death match on All In Wembley Stadium. Alton, I want to know which 2 would you want to see in that match?
Right, straight off the bat, I'm not going to pick myself. I'm not, because it comes back to what I was saying earlier about how important history is for deathmatch, and I think there are people that have been doing it longer that have earned the chance to have a spot like that. I think at the moment, Big Fucking Joe would have to be one of them, because he's the most well-known face of deathmatch wrestling from this country, and because he's an incredible talent with just boundless energy. Never ever stops. The man never stops. He doesn't sleep. I don't know. He wrestles across the world, comes home, does 2 shifts, looks after his kids, and goes back to wrestling, and never ever stops. So he deserves a big shot like that. The second one's slightly harder because there's a lot of people who, like, I think Danny Darko at the moment is not just one of the best deathmatch wrestlers in the country, but one of the best in the world. Lou Nixon is all over the place, traveling to Germany, traveling to America, or just doing it everywhere he can. If I was going to pick one, though, for me, Clint Margera, because when I was younger and I was doing the tape trading stuff, I bought a tape that had Clint Margera on it. So he's how I knew there was British Deathmatch. And that was what, like 15 years ago or something like that. So for him to still be doing it at such a high level, he's if there was if there's ever going to be like a British Deathmatch Hall of Fame, he's first ballot. So I would love to see Clint versus Joe on that kind of stage. If Drew Parker was still wrestling, I might have gone Joe versus Drew. I think that'd be really interesting. But Clint's a legend. Joe versus Clint would show everybody kind of both ends of the scale of British Deathmatch. The intense, insane, sweary guy, and the more kind of withdrawn, subdued, well thought out, more kind of tactical wrestler. So you'd get a little bit of both flavors.
Hey, just like what you say, Alton, it's a good way to honor the legends that came before us, and give them their time to shine in the biggest spotlight of all time, pretty much. Obviously, as well, another wee dream tonight I want to say is WrestleMania in the UK. Look, I want it in Scotland. I don't want to travel, as I mentioned before. But I want to know, Alton, is there a particular arena or stadium within the UK that you would like to see hold the WrestleMania?
Yes. The new Tottenham Stadium.
Oh,
That is an absolutely beautiful stadium. It would hold tons of people, and I guarantee you WrestleMania would look fucking beautiful from there. Now I know it might not have been people's first thought, but like having recently seen footage of that stadium, I think for a giant wrestling event it would be perfect. It doesn't necessarily have all the grandiose, it doesn't have like the legacy of Wembley or something like that. But for size and scale, I don't think you could do much better than Tottenham's new stadium.
hey, fair dues. I mean, as long as it's not 8 hours down to London from Wembley, I'm fine with it. I'll agree with it, and I'll happily take that journey. Now, the final dream scenario, my friend. Let's say you have a match against, any opponent. If you wish to name them, you can. But it's for a championship of any era. It could be the WWF Hardcore, the WCW Hardcore, the ECW World, GCW, TNT or anything, any kind of extreme championship. You get to win that in a match. Which title would you want to have around your waist?
Right, I'm going slightly off kilter. It's not necessarily a title that you'd wear around your waist, but it's a title that stays with you, and there is a trophy. I would want to face Mick Foley in King of the Deathmatch in Japan.
Ooh, that's a fastball there. I was not expecting that. Why particularly would you want to get that, my friend?
Mick Foley is my favorite wrestler of all time. He's pretty much the reason that I decided to move in the extreme direction that I've gone in. I think he's an amazing person, but also one of the best storytellers that wrestling's had. And I think his match with Terry Funk in 1996 in Japan was the first footage that I ever saw of a death match. It was on the It was on the 1996 interview that he did with JR in Mankind mode, and they showed a little bit of footage of him versus Terry Funk with the barbed wire ropes and Cactus falling off a ladder onto the barbed wire and exploding boards. And that was the first time I'd seen anything like that at all. Like I'd seen little pictures, but I hadn't seen like the graphic kind of nature of like you're actually viscerally seeing these people fall into dangerous. Basically, it blew my mind as a kid. It blew my mind, and if there was one thing I'd like to replicate, it would be that. It would be being in that place at that time with those fans so hot. I would love to have. Yeah, that would be what I'd want to do. Me versus Mick Foley, the finals of the King of the Deathmatch tournament.
Alton, that would be an absolutely, not only a dream, but I think a memorable moment within the wrestling history. But Alton Thorne, my friend, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you here on the Soul Sessions. Before we go, one final question. If there's a viewer right now and they're thinking of maybe attending this Bleeding Gums ultra-violent referendum, but they're a bit on the fence, they don't know, and you've got some time now to sell that show to them, what would you say? Why should they come to this historic Scottish Deathmatch wrestling show?
Because you will never see anything like it, and you will have never seen anything like it before this event. You can't see something as good as this in England at the moment. This is like taking all three of the main deathmatch companies in England and putting them all together in Scotland. It's essentially a super show. If you have any minor interest in deathmatch, this is the show that you've got to see, because until you've seen deathmatch in person, you don't fully understand. It's so different when you're there in person, when you're seeing the shit flying. It feels different. You can smell it in the air. It's exciting. That's why I would say come. And even if you don't like deathmatch, I know people that didn't think they would enjoy it. And then came to the show, and because it's so wild and so out of the ordinary, they were taken by the moment. If not the art form, then definitely like the moment. So I think it will win some people over as well. So that, yeah, I honestly think you will never see another show like it. If you get a chance, you better come.
Well, hey, you've heard it here now, folks. I mean, I'll be there as well, maybe with a wee rugby helmet and crash pads on, looking like a fucked up Build-A-Bear. But I mean, hey, I'll be there
It's
nonetheless.
recommended. It's recommended.
Fun all around, Alton. Fun all around. But obviously, Alton Thorne, again, pleasure to have you here on the show. But obviously, again, I love to do with every guest. If they've loved what they heard of you and want to see you in person for future dates, where can they see you wrestle, my friend?
Cool, right. Okay. So there's Bleeding Gums in November. That's where any Scottish fans can see me. But I'm literally all over the country all the time. So I would advise that people go onto my Twitter, which is at Alton Thorne, or my Instagram, which is at Alton Thorne Wrestling, and I will keep you updated on all of my dates. But I'm in Manchester, Liverpool, London, Nottingham, Leeds, Derby, Lincoln, Stoke. Like, you will find me somewhere.
Hey, you've heard it here from the man first, folks. And I know in this day and age, people are impatient. You want your Amazon Prime delivery. You won't cook something in the oven. You want an air fryer because it's easy and convenient. You don't want all your shows on Netflix every episodic, every weekly. You want it all binged now. So I'll make it easy for you guys. Alton Thorne's Instagram link will be in the description of this video. You can click it, follow him, and see his journey in the deathmatch scene. Alton Thorne, my friend, it's been a pleasure here having you on the Soul Sessions. I am Soul. This is the Soul Sessions. Now, I would put the whole YouTube shtick, but look, guys, come on. YouTube's been around since 2005. I ain't gonna fucking bother. You know what to do. You know what to do. Thank you for tuning in for another episode of the Soul Session.